first plenary of 8 in beauty and silence. And I'm going to start with a quote from John O'Donohue. We're going to hear from him a lot, amongst other people, but he writes, "When our eyes are graced with wonder, with awe, and with expectation, with seeking, then the world reveals its wonders to us. There are people who only see dullness in the world because their eyes and their minds and their imaginations, perhaps even their hearts, have become dull. So much depends on our awareness. It is the quality of how we look out that determines what we see." John O'Donohue from his book, Beauty. I'm wondering, as we begin together in this particular retreat, how is our seeing? Which is why I began with images this morning for our Lectio. How is our seeing? What do you observe daily as you walk through your life? And who is it that taught you to see? Who taught you to see? Was there someone who invited you to see not only what was there, but what was not there? Those things that were invisible to anyone who was not truly looking. And what comes to mind when you think of the beautiful? That word has a lot of cultural baggage right now. What comes to mind when you think of the word beautiful? What is the quality of our seeing? Back to Irish theologian, poet, and philosopher John O'Donohue. "We have often heard that beauty is in the eye of the beholder." And he said that's usually taken to mean the sense of beauty is utterly subjective. There's no accounting for taste, because each person's taste is different. Beauty is in the eye of the beholder. But he feels the statement has another meaning, more subtle, much more subtle. And he said that if our style of looking, if our way of looking becomes beautiful, then we see the beautiful. We see it in unexpected places. He says the graced eye, I love that, the graced eye can glimpse beauty anywhere. For beauty does not reserve itself for special elite moments or instances. It does not wait for perfection, but is present everywhere in everything. When we beautify our gaze, O'Donohue writes, the grace of hidden beauty becomes our joy and our sanctuary. When we beautify our gaze, the grace of hidden beauty becomes our joy and our sanctuary. A little history about my seeing. I was reared as a middle child, only girl, in a blue-collar family who lived in the city of Chicago. The houses on our street were really all very similar. 2-story, wood slat, some of them sided, some of them not. In our particular house, there was a first floor front, first floor rear, second floor front, second floor rear, and a garden apartment. And in all of those, my family lived. My grandparents, a great aunt and uncle, and an aunt and uncle with cousins, and my family, there were 5 of us. I have an older brother and a younger brother. We all lived in this house. And if you would go up and down Wayne Avenue in Chicago, everybody else's family all lived in their houses just like that. It was the 50s. That's what that was. There was a side set of stairs that were like 6 steps, 7 steps up and 7 steps down. And if you stood on those stairs or on the platform and you went like this, you were touching the house on on either side. Urban density. We thought that was urban density. I think urban density now is when you can knock on your wall and somebody else knocks back. But at that time, having to touch a house on either side was our urban density. That's really how I grew up. Our backyard was the size of your room over at the inn. It was this little, maybe 10 by 10 patch, yeah. Because at the end of the house, there was that little patch, and then there was a garage that led out to an alley. That was the yard. You didn't need a riding lawnmower. But next to the front steps on the front of the house was a garden that my grandparents kept. It was smaller than that backyard. So if that was 10 by 10, this was 7 by 7. But it was meticulous. There was a fountain in the middle, not one that ran, it was like a bird bath thing. There were flowers around that. Then there were flagstone around so that you could actually work in the garden without stepping on anything in the garden. And then out to the corners of the square piece, there were more flowers. The taller ones were at the edge and the shorter ones were in the middle. You had to enter that through a gate that was on the side, so not everybody went in there. If my grandmother had her way, nobody else would have went in there. It was a looking garden. However, I remember it as magical because from the time I was little, and when I was little too, some of those flowers on the edges were taller than I was. So I might as well have been in a forest. That's what I'm remembering from my youth. It was the kind of place now that I think of it kind of in dreams. I remember that very often. I remember it. And I remember it now amidst the hard surfaces of the city, the noise and the activity and I remember it differently now than I actually was taking it in. And I thought it was beautiful. The second beautiful space from my youth was our church. We belong to St. Alphonsus Parish. It's also where I went kindergarten through 7th grade before we moved. It was a tall, Gothic building, white limestone, copper spires that surely went to heaven. They were very tall. And inside was as beautiful as the outside. There were stained glass windows. There were frescoes of the Stations of the Cross. When you walked in, there was a red glow up front with all of the candles in their little red glass jars. So it always smelled like candles were burning when you walked in. The sounds were just hush. Opening and closing of a confessional door. People's clothes, because no one was speaking in there. So you heard people's clothes as they entered and they were swishing and genuflecting and scooting over into their pews. Those are the beautiful sounds that I recall when I think of that place. And in reflecting on it, it seems that the beauty of it seemed to just like fall like a gift. It was just there. No one told me ever that it was beautiful. No one actually had to say that. You walked in and it kind of hit you from every nook and cranny as far as I remember. And it brings me back to John O'Donohue, when we beautify our gaze, when we're looking with beautiful eyes from the inside, then the grace of the hidden beauty becomes obvious to us. It becomes our joy and our sanctuary. So my city block, the garden, the church, those were my earliest experiences of beauty. No one ever called my attention to them. No one ever told me that they were beautiful. No one even encouraged me to see them that way. But sometimes beauty, you just sense it. It is just there. No one has to tell you when you look out that it's beautiful out there. It just is. Beauty sometimes seems to pour itself out on us. Whether or not we can take that in is on our part. It's always coming. Whether or not we can see it is on our part. I experience these things as gifts and as something that I had to stop and look at. I've always been someone who's had to stop and look. And if John O'Donohue is right, that it means we're all, at least at first in childhood, we're all born with these graced eyes to see this stuff. We can't name it. I couldn't have named beauty. I didn't know that it was even something I should have been looking for, but it was there. But in my research, I found a lot of people who wanted to talk about beauty also talked about the fact that although we're born with that as an ability, we lose it in our childhood. Nothing terrible actually had to happen for us to lose it, but we lose it in our childhood. Other things begin to crowd in. In his blog, Beautiful Summer Mornings, Nick Grimshaw writes, "As a child, we saw everything in Technicolor. We found wonders around every corner. We ran and jumped with joy just because we felt like it. Until one day, someone usually older told us that we were silly or not quite appropriate for our age, and we began the process of pulling in. We began to learn to conduct ourselves in a proper manner." I wonder if we spent some time, we couldn't define that moment for us when we had some pulling in. We might not remember what anybody said, but we might remember when we started to pull in. Anthropologist Ashley Montague did some work on this kind of graced seeing in childhood. And she said that children demonstrate capacities that adults only partially still have. Not that we never have them, we put them away. But children have these abilities that adults only partly have. And those things are curiosity, a sense of wonder, contact with our emotions, experimenting, spontaneity, and effortless learning. Effortless learning. She writes that slowly as we grow, these traits tend to weaken in us. And she believes that our childhood is so much longer than that of other mammals. So humans, our childhood lasts longer than other mammals. If you ever saw any kind of animal be born, you know that our childhood lasts a lot longer than they do. I mean, they stand up, 3 hours later. But she said, because our childhood lasts so long, it allows us to evolve more than other species, because our time of extended childhood wonder is the stuff of our growth. It's what gives us wisdom. It's what gives us wisdom. She said our childhood faculties actually facilitate our survival. Play, that we did with our 6 brothers, makes us more skillful. Curiosity multiplies our opportunities. And beauty and aesthetic sensibility. She said, the world is difficult and complex and hostile, and to find something interesting and beautiful helps us to feel more at home, cope more easily, and function more competently. We have this sense of the aesthetic, we have this sense of the beautiful that helps us feel more at home in a difficult, hostile world, helps us cope more easily and function more competently. To appreciate the shape of a tree, a human face, the color of flowers, the taste of berries, puts us in touch with the ineffable, which in turn helps us manage problems that come our way. This is what makes the perception of beauty necessary, she writes. The perception of beauty is necessary. Her article, as I was reading it, reminded me of the Harry Chapin song. Flowers are red, green grass is green, and there's no reason to see them any way than the way they always have been seen. I can play that for us later. I can't play it on tape because then YouTube kicks me off if I use copyrighted material. So I will play it for us, but I can't play it while we're taping. The trouble, of course, with that kind of philosophy, the trouble with that kind of situation occurring is that in our process of pulling in our process of no longer being inappropriate, in our process of giving up these things that were ours in our childhood, what we saw, what we experienced, what we delighted in, our relinquishment taught us not to live from the inside, but from the outside. We let the outside form us, tell us who we were. Yeah. So then we're not living from our true selves, but from a caricature that we have consented to agree with of the world around us. And we're not living from heart, we're not living from spirit, but from a reflection of someone or a lot of someones around us instead. And it is in fact living as something less than who we are. But it doesn't need to be that way. We can choose to see beauty. We can choose to appreciate beauty. I don't know about you, but conversations about beauty are not conversations I often have with people. And we can all decide for ourselves why that is for us. But I have a story from time change in November of last year, so 2022, spring ahead, fall back. So on those days, those mess with my sleeping. And it was 3 o'clock in the morning, and I was absolutely wide awake. Not only were my eyes open, my brain was already going, and it was 3 o'clock in the morning. I did all my usual things. I got a drink of water, I got up and went to the bathroom, I laid down in a different direction, I turned over my pillows, I did one of everything. And I finally rolled over and I said into the very black night, "Are you awake?" And Sam said, "Yeah." "You've been doing this little dance over there for the last 20 minutes. He was awake. And I said, "Well, let's get up. I can't just lay here." And he said, "Well, what are you gonna do?" And I said, "Well, I'm gonna go paint." That's not unusual. That's what I do. Jean, you know the story. When I first got sick in 2019, I was on a medication that gave me a 24-hour clock. Up 2 hours, sleep 2 hours. Up an hour, sleep an hour. And I did that for over 30 days, where there was no day, there was no night, there was just 2 hours and 2 hours and 2 hours and 2 hours. And I had to figure out stuff to do in the middle of the night when I was wide awake and he was still going to work in the morning, and I couldn't say, "Hey, are you awake?" And that's when I started painting. I figured out, took me a couple weeks, I figured out that there are online, in real-time classes from halfway around the world in different time zones that I could take. And so I started taking painting classes from people in Iceland and Greenland and South Africa, and those people are up when the rest of us are sleeping. So that's what I did. I was taking painting classes during that time, and so when I got up in the middle of the night these days, the first thing I think of is, "Hey, I'm just gonna go paint." So I went and didn't have anything in particular that I thought I was gonna do. Got up 3 o'clock in the morning. Sam went to his computer, made a cup of coffee, and I had just bought some new inks. So I thought, ooh, I could try out all these colors. So inks come in a bottle with a dropper, so I'm putting drops on and using a palette knife and kind of spreading them around, and I was having a great time using all my favorite colors and putting them all over this piece of paper, and I thought, this will make a great background for something. First of all, I love all these colors, and I don't know what it's gonna be, but whoa, I really like this. And the more I looked at it, it's the seeing thing. It's the looking longer than you normally would. The longer I looked at it, I thought, there's a candle in the middle there, or there wants to be a candle in the middle there. And so that's what I did. I continued to work with it, and I put on some metallic copper color, and aha, that's what it was. Not quite this size, it was like, that's what it was. And it was in the seeing, it was in the looking, it was in the looking longer than I had to. You know how many times we pass by something and we say, oh yeah, that's nice. What if we stood before it for, this morning our exercise was 35-40 minutes. What if we stood before it for 45 minutes? What might we see? Do we have a graced gaze to look at the world, whatever it is? The flowering tree, the dogwoods, the flowering trees, the stream. Do we have a graced gaze? It can work with all of our senses in our hearing the water coming down the mountain, listening to the birds. Do we have a graced gaze? And I'm spending a lot of time this morning talking about taking in, because as we go through the week, we're going to develop what really is it that we're taking in, and how does that relate to our meditation, and how does that relate to silence. So the cover of our retreat folder is what came from that morning. And this is the thing about what we take in. No one else has to agree with us that it's beautiful. It's not for anyone else, it's just for us. It's nice if it's beautiful for somebody else, but that's not a requirement. It just needs to be beautiful for us. The sense of it, the part of our spirit that appreciates it, is something God gives each of us. And not the same to everyone. Yeah. So I think both the act of seeing and the act of actually noticing, which I'm contending is a second step, seeing and then noticing, are really acts of prayer. They're acts of worship. They are graced. They're opportunities for gratitude. Yeah. And they're all enough. Whatever it is we do, it's enough for the moment, for us. So doing and making and noticing are both a gift from God and also a reflection of God in us. A gift from God and a reflection of God in us. We don't have to paint to be creators of beauty. I just happened to do that. When I had to give up ministry in 2019 because I was sick, I thought, now what am I going to do? What am I going to do with that? I hadn't planned on retiring anytime soon, but I could no longer function that way. So now what? And I had this crazy painting experience in the middle of the night. We are all given a way to see and experience, and then to give back. And sometimes it changes without our permission, without our bidding, without our asking. Think of the ways that you create beauty in your life. People who care in a particular way for other people are creating beauty. When I was serving in church in Indiana, I had a man in my congregation in his maybe early 80s whose wife was in a care facility, and she had Alzheimer's, and he would go there every single day, twice a day. He had breakfast with her every morning. He'd go home and attend to the house, and at night he'd go back. Toward the end of her life, she had no idea who he was. He would go every morning, and he would go back every night. Caring for someone else is an act of beauty for people with graced gaze. You can see beauty there. Someone who gives from their heart, generous people who are not giving because it's a tax shelter, but who are giving from their heart. That's something of beauty, if we can see it as something of beauty. Someone who is an encourager, who is constantly encouraging other people, is creating something beautiful. Someone who stands by someone who bears someone else's burden in whatever way they are able, that is beautiful. Noticing first light in the morning or noticing twilight in the evening is beautiful. Doesn't cost us anything. We just have to stop, look, see. Appreciating the petals on a flower that everybody else calls a weed. Here, especially since yesterday, noticing the sounds of the birds in the distance. All of these things are beautiful. They're all daily. They're all common. They're examples of the beauty that's all around us, all the time. And our blessing is in seeing. But to do that, we need to stop, or at least slow down, to appreciate. When we beautify our gaze, the grace of the hidden beauty becomes our joy and our sanctuary. It's everywhere, for everyone. Seeing, apprehending, finding, appreciating, creating, noticing beauty is godly business. Godly business. Persian poet Rumi wrote, "Let the beauty we love be what we do. There are hundreds of ways to kneel and kiss the ground." Let the beauty we love be what we do. There are hundreds of ways to kneel and kiss the ground. And again, take time to see the quiet miracles, those that seek no attention. I'm watching the leaves rustle in the tree out that window. They're not seeking any attention, but there's sun dabbled on some of them, and some of them are in the dark, and it makes 100 different color green. Take time to see the quiet miracles that seek no attention. And I think that's where it is. In our silence, in our non-anxious life, in our training ourselves for that, in our undistracted moments, that we take the time to apprehend beauty, to see and to be and to do, quiet miracles happen. It's in our mindful silence that we are able to cultivate and really, if the psychologists are right, to recultivate the gaze of grace that perhaps has been diminished since our childhood. It is in our stillness that we come back to childlike ability to notice beauty all around us just by our being. You could stand anywhere here on this property and see beauty. Most importantly, it is when we cultivate that kind of being that we do in our meditation. It's not that we find some things in the silence that are beautiful. We find someone. We find someone. The author of beauty, the substance and the originator of beauty. The beauty we apprehend awakens us to the nearness of God all the time. Just all the time. Famous line from Dostoevsky's The Idiot says, "Beauty will save the world." In a blog, Father Charles Clamott, Klamut, comments on this when he writes, "Beauty will save the world, that remains to be seen." But beauty has saved me, he says. My experience is that I needed saving, and beauty saved. Or to put it more precisely, beauty points us to the one who saves, who is beauty itself. Beauty moves us, awakens us, provokes us, bringing freshness and newness to hearts that have too easily grown old and stale. Without beauty, our duties prove too hard. An old, tired soul cannot sustain itself. Beauty renews the soul and points us back to our origins. Where are our origins? What are our origins? Our common faith would tell us that our origin is that we are made in the image and likeness of God. The God who created us, the one who is choosing to create, who chose to create beauty. So when we are renewed by beauty, we are renewed by God. When we are being drawn by beauty, we are being drawn by God. We are faithful in expressing beauty because we are sharing and expressing the one who makes all things beautiful. So I give the final word to Father Clement. Beauty is not a luxury or an extra. How many of us have thought that? Beauty is not a luxury or an extra. It is what comes first. Beauty makes life begin again. Beauty makes life begin again. Amen? Amen. Thank you. So we're going to move into our meditation time.